Hi there once again, and welcome to another Espresso Mechanic tutorial. And in this one we're going to be building what we see on the screen, which is a plasma arc generator, often seen in films like Frankenstein, that kind of thing. That's what we're aiming for with this one. Now, in order to achieve this, well, it's a little bit more involved than it at first seems. We're going to be using a number of Espresso expressions, and we're also going to be using Python in order to achieve the desired result. That's what we're about in this tutorial. So without further ado, let's see if we can make this happen. We'll start by bringing in a sphere. In our Object tab, we'll make it 30 in the radius and 30 in the segments there, just to make a nice round sphere. We'll move the sphere along its y-axis to 400. And now hit O so that we can see it, and C to make it editable, and then go into points mode. Now we just need to select our bottom point here. That's the one we're interested in. Hit F3 for right hand view, O for object, and then we'll get a little bit closer. So just zoom in a little bit closer, and then we can move this until we get a flat base to the sphere. F1 to return to our 3D view, and polygon mode, UL for loop selection, and we'll select this group of polygons. We can then hit D for extrude, and we'll extrude by 400 as we've got here. So apply. And that gives us our first pole. So that's fine, and it's looking really nice and set up where I want it to be. Now, what I need to do is just make it a little bit higher in my X, or rather Y-axis I should say. Let's just select coordinates and go 430. That's better, and now it's at ground zero, which is where I want it to be. And the next thing I can do is think about creating an edge spline, and we want to use this particular edge here. But before we go there, I'm going to hit KL for loop selection, and just by eye I'm going to put a loop cut just there. So this is going to give us a starting point for where the actual arc appears and then rises up. So that's what we're doing there. We'll come back to our brush selection, and let's see where we are. If we just select our front view, that might be where we need to be. Let's have a look. Do I need to be there, or do I need to be in my right hand view? Let's go back to my 3D view. I think my right hand view is where I need to be. So in my right hand view, I'll just hit H so that I can see everything. Yeah, that's the view I need to be in. So let's get a little closer. And I just need to select this edge. Now in edge mode, just this particular edge is all I need. Go back to my 3D view, and hopefully I've just got that single edge. If I've got two edges, it's easy enough to take one away. Let's zoom in closer. And we have got two edges. I just need to remove one of them. So I will say Command click on there just to remove that edge. Okay, great. So I've got my edge selected. Let's have a look and see if I've got. Yeah, that's going to work. That's going to work okay. That's fine. The next thing to do is zoom in closer to the sphere, and we need to use a path selection just to add to this. So in my select mode, or in my select menu I should say, let's just go to path selection, and we're along this edge, so we can hold the shift key down and just draw through here until we get to the center of the sphere, which is here. And that's given us a path for our arc to travel along, and that's what we're doing. So that's great. We can then say in our mesh here, edge to spline, and we've got our spline for our arc to travel along. So that's fine, that's great. The next thing to do is bring in a null. The null is at the base of the pole, which is exactly where it needs to be, and then we can just group this into here. And now we can think about rotating. Now let's see where we are. So our null, we need to rotate around our rotation P, so we can say 5 degrees. And that's fine, that's moved it to where I think I need it to be. So that, or actually it's -5, I beg your pardon, -5. Yeah, because I need the spline on the inside. That's fine, so that's good. That's the first one of those done. Next thing to do, I'm just going to switch to, well, actually what I'll do, yeah, if I just, where am I? If I can I'll probably just adjust it along the Z-axis manually actually. If I just move this 15, possibly a bit more, I think we'll go, I think probably, yeah, 50 probably be more appropriate. If we just move that 50, what I can then do is in my world coordinates here, just command drag to copy this and then rotate it 180 degrees. And we've got two of them, and we can just set this one up at -50. Great. So we've got our two poles and they're set up where they need to be. And both of them have the splines in, which is fantastic. Right, great. So we've got the first little part of this done, and now we can move on and think about where we're going from here. I'm going to bring in a null. In fact, I'm going to bring in 3 nulls. The first one I'm just going to rename carriers. And these I will call C1 and C2. And I'm going to group both of these into carriers and just drop this down at the bottom. So these are going to basically be the first items that we're going to be animating. And we're going to do that by using align to spline tags. So we'll bring in animation tags align to spline for both of these carriers here. Now they're going to be using these splines, so let's see which one is which. If we just select, yeah, it's going to be this one. So this is going to be our right spline. I'll call this R spline, and this one will be L spline. Stage left and stage right. So that will be our 2 splines ready to go. We can always put this up here, and we'll rename these. Actually, we'll call this left pole and right pole. That's fine. So we've got that worked out and everything is okay. Now C1, we'll place this on the left spline. So in our spline path here, we'll just drag in our left spline, drag that into there, and straight away C1 has jumped to the correct position. And with C2 we'll drag our right spline in there, and C2 is now at the correct position. And we know that if we start to adjust our position here, when we select these, we can see that they have moved. So that's all good. They're somewhere near the top. Now at the moment there's a bit of a problem there because the way they're moving is wrong, because the splines are not set up correctly. So if we select both of our splines, go into our object tab, linear type splines, that's fine, but what we really need to do is make them uniform, because if they're adaptive it will cause problems with the motion, and we want a uniform motion. Yeah, we'll leave them as linear, we don't need to do anything with that, that's fine. So now when if we select C1 and C2, we can see that they're just here now, which is about where they should be. In fact, it's absolutely where they should be. So great, so that's working okay. Now, in order to move C1 and C2, we're actually going to use keyframe animation. So we'll set our timeline to 150 because we want to do this over 5 seconds, and bring our position back to 0. We can record there, skip through to the last frame, so click on there and make this 100% and record the position there. And now if we go back to the beginning, select C1 and C2 and run the sequence, we can see that they're moving uniformly to the top of the spline. The only thing I don't like is that we've got things set up slightly different in the F-curve manager to the way I would want them. Let's have a look and see what we've got in here, and we'll select that one as well. What we need, if we where are we, frame all, we can see that we've got a curve. We don't want that, we actually want something different, so we want to set this to linear mode, and the same for this one too. We just set that to linear. That's fine. Great, all working as I want it to. So our carriers are now set up and they're behaving exactly as we need them to behave. The next step then is to create another spline, believe it or not. So we've got to do that next, and we'll bring in our spline pen tool. So we'll just come up to the spline menu, spline pen, and we just want 2 points. That's as much as we want. So hit escape and we've got our spline ready. Now this spline is going to be our carrier spline, and that's going to have an important part to play. And now we can move on and actually set this carrier spline moving with our carriers. So in order to do that, we'll set it up using an Espresso expression. We'll bring in a null and name it Espresso. And then we can give it the Espresso tag. We've got the editor open and we're ready to start having a go. Now let's see what we want. So for a start, what we do actually need is a hierarchy. We'll bring that in first. It's quite a simple setup, this one actually. So let's just grab a hold of an iterator and it'll be a hierarchy. Now at the moment, it references the Espresso null, which is always the case. That's incorrect. We need it to be carriers. So we'll bring that into there. So now we're referencing what we've got here, and we're going to be getting these two, which is exactly what we want. Next thing to do is grab a hold of an object index. So bring one of those in, and we can plumb the object output into the instance input of the object index. We can then bring in C1, and from our instance port here, we'll just bring this into an object port on C1. And at the output stage, we want global position. So we'll bring that in. Command double click on there just to make that bigger so that we can see everything. And then we need to bring in our carrier spline. So we'll bring that in. At the output stage, give it an object port. And then our final node for this expression will be a point node. So we'll bring one of those in. Don't need to worry about the yellow top. We'll connect our spline output port to there. And we need the index port here to be connected to the object index, or point index port, I should say, of the point node. And then we simply need to bring in a point position. We'll place this in the center, just make that a little bigger. And then all we need to do is connect this port to this port, and straight away our spline has jumped to where it needs to be. And if we run our sequence now, we can see that our carrier spline is moving up our poles, exactly what it needs to do. So great, we're making some more progress. Moving on from here, we need to decide where we're going next. And that will be basically to bring in a lot more nulls, because we're going to need some objects that we're going to use to actually control the point positions of yet another spline. So that is where we're going next. I'll bring in 9 nulls, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and we'll rename them. I'm just going to say B1, B2, B3, B4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and finally B9. I'm going to group these into another null, so Option G to group, and I'm going to name this bases, and that's why they're B1 through B9. So we can drop these just beneath the carrier spline for now. Now the next thing we need to do is actually place these along the carrier spline. So we need to place them equidistant along the carrier spline, and to do that we need another Espresso expression. So let's bring one of those in, come down and get a tag. And we're ready to start work with this. Now before we go there, let's just select all of these and just change the shapes to circles, and we'll make them 5. That makes them visible for us, and we can say that they can be positioned along their x-axis. That's fine, we'll leave them as the x, and that way they'll be nicely visible to us. Right, fantastic. So let's start with what we're doing here. Once again, we need to start with a hierarchy. So we'll come down to our iterator menu here, hierarchy. And once again, we do need to change the reference because currently it's referencing the Espresso node. And on this occasion, we want to be referencing bases. So we've got that set up the way it needs to be. Great. We need another object index for the next step. So we'll grab a hold of one of those, plumb our object output into the instance port. And then the next node that we need is a tag iterator node. So we need to grab one of those from our iterators. Our instance output can plumb into the object input port of our tag. And down here in the tag type, we're going to select align to spline. Now, before we go any further, we need to give each one of these an align to spline. So in our tags, animation tags, align to spline, and now they've all got those. And the path they need is the carrier spline, so we'll bring that in to there. And now we're ready to go. We can see that we've got them at the beginning of our carrier spline here. They're all in the same position at the moment. We want to space them out equally, and that's what we're going to do next. So if we bring in just one align to spline tag, we can connect this up to the object port at the beginning there. And then we can bring in the tag properties a position port. And then all we need to do is bring in a math divide. So we'll bring one of those in. We'll change the function from add to divide. And we can connect the index port to input number 1, and at input number 2 we'll divide by 8 and plumb this into the position port. And straight away we've got a result. Now, at the moment we can see that things are not quite right, and that again is because the carrier spline is currently an adaptive spline and we need it to be uniform. And now we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 circles along our carrier spline. So that's working perfectly. Fantastic. So what I'll also do is if I come down into my bases here, select my basic tab. I'm just going to change their color. So let's go to automatic and we'll make them, let's make them a green. So if we select a green color for them, and that's fine. We can see them really easily now. That's nice. Okay, that's fantastic. So that's the next little part of this done. Moving on from here, we need to create another spline, which will be our arc spline. And then we need to create some targets for each of our bases. So that's going to be our next step. So we'll just close the Espresso editor for a moment. Go to our spline menu, spline pen tool once again. And if we just create, so look, have we got that selected? Yes, we have. If we just create a new spline, we want 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 points. So 1 point for each of our circles that we've got positioned along, or they're not circles, are they? They're nulls that just happen to be represented by circles, but you know, we want 1 point for each of those. Let's hit the escape key to come out of that, and we've got that spline set up. Now, before we go any further, let's just change its intermediate points. Now, let's have a look, see what we've got. The type is Bezier. I don't really want it to be a Bezier spline. I'd rather it was a cubic spline. Adaptive, let's make it, we can actually, to be honest, in this instance we can leave that as adaptive. I think that will work okay for us, so we'll leave it as it is. So just make it a cubic spline, leave the intermediate points as adaptive. That's fine. Great, so the carrier spline is ready. Let's just rename, or rather the arc spline. Arc spline, we'll rename that, and that's ready to go. We'll drop it just here. Now, I said I wanted some more null objects, so let's do another 9 of those. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. And we need to place all of these into our bases, and they need to be zeroed out. So if we grab a hold of each one of these and just drop them in. This is a long process. I mean, we could have perhaps shortened it a little bit by creating them when we did the bases, but it doesn't really matter too much. But we'll drop them in and get them sorted out. And what I'll do, I'll carry on doing this and then come back to you by the power of editing. So I've dropped all of my nulls into each of the bases here, and I've renamed them T1, 2, 3, etc. through to T9. Now at the moment they're not zeroed out, so I need to select all of these. In my coordinates it says mixed. What I need to simply do is zero them out. And now they're all at the correct positions. And what we can do next is, again, with them all selected, go into the Basic tab. In fact, going to Objects first. Let's change the shape of them and we'll make them diamonds. We can see that they're all in the correct places. I will make them smaller. I'll make them something like 3 so that they're within the circles. And then in my Basic tab here, I'll change their colours again. And this time I'm going to use a sort of pink. I think that will be quite nice. We should be able to see them quite easily then. And as we can see, they are clearly visible and we're ready to go. So make sure you've got this set up then. Base nulls with target nulls which are zeroed out within them. And then the final step, which is optional really, but if you choose to do it, that's fine. Just turn them into pink diamonds and that will make them somewhat easier to see. But anyway, they're all set up and ready to go. We've also got arc spline ready to go, and the next thing we need to do is give the points of the arc spline the positions of each one of these targets. That's going to be our next port of call. And to do that, we're reaching for Xpresso once again. We don't need another expression at the moment, we just simply need to add to this one. So we'll open our expression up again and move on from here. The first thing we need is a linked list. So we'll bring in one of those. Just place it here. And we need the index port from our object index here plumbed into the index port of the linked list. So that's the first little part. Now we need to populate our linked list and we need to populate it with all of our targets. So if we select all of those, just reselect the linked list, select the eyedropper and just click on one of them, we get them all in. So they're all in, and we've got that part ready. We can bring in T1, give it an object port at the input stage to connect the linked list. At the output stage, a global position port. And then we're ready to bring in the arc spline. So we'll bring that into here, object port at the output stage. And then finally, we need a point node. So we'll bring one of those in. And we're ready to move from here. So let's just push this over there. Now the index, once again, this will come from the object index. So we'll place that in there and we'll just rearrange things. We'll just put that up the top and we can plumb the arc spline into the object port. And now we're ready to plumb in the global output or the global position output port from the T1, and that will go into a position port here. We can plumb that in there, and straight away our spline has now jumped to where it needs to be. So that's all working as it should. Okay, that's great. So that completes this expression. We don't need to do any more in there. That's that one completely worked out. Fantastic. Okay, so if we play the sequence, what we'll see is that everything is working as we would want it to. So all of our targets are being spaced equidistant along the spline no matter what happens, and our arc spline is also being placed along those as well. There's something going on there though that looks a little bit dubious. Let's have a look and see what we've got there. Something a little bit strange. It might be that we've got a lag problem. Yeah, we've got a bit of a lag problem. Not too worried about that. We can sort that out later, but we can see that it's all working. That's fine. It's all doing what it should be doing. So hit H so that we can see everything again. So great. Yeah, so far so good. That's really excellent. So the next thing then that we need to worry about is actually working with yet another Xpresso expression. And on this occasion, we're also going to be using the Python node, which is going to be the key to making all of this hang together. Let's select the Xpresso null and bring in another Xpresso tag. Okay, so the first node I need on this occasion will be an iterator. On this occasion, we don't need a hierarchy, just an iteration. So we'll bring one of those in. Now, the start and end. We want a start of 0. That's fine. The end needs to be 6. Now, why will it be 6, I hear you say? Because we're going to be interested in working with our targets, but we're not interested in T1 and T9. They can stay exactly where they are. They don't need to move. The ones we're interested in are the ones in between them. These all need to move. So that's why we've done that. Next thing we need will be a linked list once again. So we'll bring one of those in and connect the iteration out to the index port. And then we can think about populating the list. So with the eyedropper, we want T1, or rather T2, I beg your pardon, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8. And I've got 2 T6s in there, so I need to rename that one T7. That's fine. Okay, great. So we've got those in there, and they're ready to go. Moving on from here, we'll bring in well, it can be any of them, but we'll bring in T1 for what it is. Just bring that in to the expression editor. If it will let me, will it let me do that? It won't actually, because I've still got the eyedropper selected, so I didn't need to do that. Let's just take away T1 from there because we don't want it in there. So bring T1. I've still got it selected. Take that away. Go away. That's better. Now we've got T1 in there. So we'll put an object port in the input stage there and connect this one. And then we can also bring in two position. We want 2 position ports on this occasion, not global position. So we want to transform the position Y, and we'll also want to transform the position Z. The X is being taken care of by the carrier spline, so we don't need to worry about that. Okay, great. So we've got that far. Moving on from here then, we need the all-important Python node, and then we can think about coding. So we've got our Python node in. We'll get this set up. We'll remove these 2 ports. Now the output 1, we can actually rename. We'll just rename that one pos underscore Y. And then we'll bring in another, and it'll be a float, and we'll rename that pos underscore Z. So those are our 2 output ports, and at the input stage we need an integer, and we'll rename this, and it will be index. Okay, so that's our Python node set up and ready to go. The iteration we can plumb in to here, and for the moment we'll leave it like that. We won't plumb these in to here yet. That's where they're ultimately going to go. So the pos Y will be to the pos Y, and obviously the Z to the Z. So that's what we're going to be doing ultimately. But anyway, the next step for us is to switch to a scripting layout and start coding. So let's switch to a script layout and reselect this, reselect the Python node, close this up, open in editor, and then just do a little bit of readjustment. So we'll bring this over here, clear this out, and then we can start thinking about what we're doing. So we've got global pos Y, we need pos underscore Z. We also need some more variables. You'll see what these do as things progress. So we're going to call this Y underscore lower, Z underscore lower. We'll also bring in Y underscore upper and Z underscore upper. Trigger, start underscore time, and finally splines. So those are our global variables. We don't need any more than that, but there's a fair few of them. Now at the top here, we also need to import random. Just make sure we get that correct, random. Okay, brilliant. So those are done and ready to go. Now, the next thing we need to do is actually add some user data to our Python node. So we've got it selected here. If we now go into our user data and we say add user data, we'll call this let's have a look. Spline. Well, we can add a group, but we don't necessarily need to on this occasion. I think we'll just add spline for a start. And in the data type, obviously it will need to be a spline. And we're going to be using this in a range mapper. Now the first thing to do is actually work out a basic shape. Now what we're going to be using these for, we're going to be using them to introduce more randomness into the actual arc spline. That's what we're going to be using them for. What we'll do is add a point to our spline, bring that in there, add another point, just put it up here, and another point and bring that one in there. Now on this occasion, I'm just going to twirl this open. I don't want my tangents to be 0.25, I want them to 0.125. And these should already be 0.125, and so should our final spline over here. This should be, well, it's not at the moment, so make it minus 0.125. So that they're all equal. So that's our first spline. Now I actually want 7 of these, so what I'll do again, I'll set them all up, and by the power of editing, I'll come back to you and show you what I've done. But for the start, let's just create another one of these. So I'll hold down my command key, call this spline 1. I'm going to rename that one actually spline 0. So I've got 0 and 1. Now 1, all I'm going to do here is just invert this. Bring that up there. Just bring that down there. Okay, so I've added all the splines, and as we can see, they're all slightly different. So they're all going to do slightly different things when we incorporate them into our Python code and apply them to the arc spline. Now, the shapes I've got here, they're not written in stone. You can make them similar to these, or you can do something completely different. It's entirely up to you. But that's what I've chosen to do, and it's all ready to go, so we'll go with that. Okay, the next step then is to start bringing these into the Python editor. So if we grab a hold of spline 0, we can just bring that one in. And I will call this spline _0, and it will be equal op. And then basically it's a case of rinse and repeat. So again, by the power of editing, I'll get this done and then come back to you. And finally, spline _6 equals op. So we've got our splines in, and they're all named and ready for our next step, which will be to bring in the ubiquitous frame variable. That's what next thing we need to do. In fact, I'm going to put that up here. So frame is equal to doc.getTime .getFrame, open brackets, doc.getFPS, open double close. So that will bring in, as I always say, our frames from the timeline for anybody who doesn't know. And that's ready to go for our next step from here. Now, moving on from here, we need to say if frame is equal to 0. So when we're at the start of the animation, we need to set things up. So pos y, which will be, if we just open this again, we'll just put this on the screen. So pos y, so we're referring to this here. So pos underscore, rather, just get that right, pos underscore y, not pos underscore s. Pos underscore y, we're going to say is equal to 0 at frame 0. Okay. We'll say the same with pos underscore z. That will be equal to 0. Y lower, and that will be equal to an empty list. Z lower, an empty list. Y upper, another empty list. Z upper, you guessed it, the same again. Finally, we want trigger, and start underscore time. All empty lists. Moving on from here, we want splines. And this will be a list containing each of our splines here. So spline 0, we'll place that in there. Spline 1. Spline 2. And so we go on until we just get all of these in. And we've got all of our splines into our list. Now, the next thing we're going to do with these is actually treat them like a pack of cards, and we're going to shuffle them. So we're going to say random.shuffle brackets splines. And that will make sure that we don't have them always in the order that they're in at the moment. So we can shuffle the pack and change the order to whatever the random shuffle decides to do. And that will help us create a completely different look each time our arc spline rises up our poles. That's what we're doing that for. So random.shuffle, that's useful. Okay, brilliant. The next part of this then is a for loop. So for I in range, and it will be 0, 7, because we're interested in working with our 7 null objects here. That's why we're doing that. So 0, 7, and then we'll start working with some random values. So we can say RND is equal to, and it will be random dot uniform, and we will be working with values between -20 and 20. Okay, so random uniform is for working with, and they're floating point values actually, they're not integers, so that's what we're going to get. We're going to get values, floating point values between -20 and 20. We can then say y lower dot append, and it will be RND. We can then say y upper dot append, and this time it will be minus, if we've got a space there, let's take that space out, and this time it will be minus RND. So we want the inverse of what we've got. So whatever we get here, we want to put a minus sign in front of it. Okay, so that's fine. So if it was a minus value, we'd get a plus value. So that's those two sorted out. Now what we can do here is take all of this code and copy it, paste it in here, and this time we can just change the y lower to z lower and z upper here, and that's all we need to do. So we need to just repeat that for the z axis. Brilliant. So we've got that done. We can now think of doing the next part of our code, and this is where we need an else statement here. So at any other time other than frame 0, we want to do what's coming next. So what do we want to do? Well, we need to work with range mappers, and of course we need to work with our trigger value and our start time and stuff like that, because we need a monoflop as well, so we need duration and all that kind of stuff. So we're going to be doing that next. So we can say if len brackets, and it will be y lower. That's what we're going to use here to set up our trigger. So y lower, and we can say is equal to 7. So if we've got 7 values in y lower, that's fine. We've got what we want, and we can then say we can work with our trigger. So we can then say if len brackets trigger, and it will be is less than 1, trigger dot append brackets 1. We can also say if len start time is less than 1, start time dot append, and it will be frame. So we want the current frame from our timeline. Great, so we've got it that far. Now we can come back to the level of the first if statement here and say if len trigger is equal to 1. So if we've got a value in our trigger list, so if it's been triggered, I suppose we can say if len trigger is equal to 1, duration is equal to frame minus frame, or rather start time, I beg your pardon, start time, and it will be brackets, square brackets, 0. So whatever frame we've got in our start time, we're going to subtract from the frame, thus zeroing things out. So if we were at frame 50, we'd zero it out at that point and then work from there onwards with our mono flop, and that's what we're doing next. So we can then say if duration is less than 150, so we're going to be doing it over the full length of our timeline, over 150 frames, we can say range underscore mapper underscore y is equal to, and it will be c4d dot utils dot range map brackets. First thing we need is duration as our input value, and it will be a value between 0 and 150. We can then say y underscore lower brackets, and it will be index. So now we're working with what we've got here, this index value coming in from the iteration. So we're going to step through our y list, or our y lower list, because that will be populated with values that we've created here, these random values, and we're going to sequence through them using the index from the index which is being controlled by the iteration. That's what we're going to be doing. So we can just close that square bracket there, and then we can say y underscore upper, and it will be brackets index once again, comma false, because we could be working with negative values. We know that we're selecting values between -20 and 20, so we must say false in here. And then finally splines square brackets index. So at any given time we're taking the spline that we need from our splines list, and that's the way we do this. Now we can also copy this code and we will paste it in here, and it's not quite pasted in the right place, I don't think. So look, let's just make sure I've got that right. So paste that in. That's very interesting because it's one space in and it shouldn't be. It should be there. That's where that should be. Don't quite know why that was pasting that one space in. But anyway, this will be range mapper Z. And once again, we've got to change the Y's for Z's. And everything else can stay the same. That's all good. So that's our two range mappers that we've created. We can then think about what we're going to do next. So at this level, at our range mappers level, we can say pos underscore y is equal to range mapper underscore y. Again, copy this piece of code, paste it in here, change the y's for z's, and we've done it. We've got both of our range mappers sorted out. And then finally, what we need to do is come back to the level of our if statement here and type else, and it will simply be trigger dot clear, and start underscore time dot clear. Okay, and that is our code. That's our code complete. We don't need to do anything else. So it's not an enormous amount of code, just a few things that we need to set up, and then a couple of range mappers in conjunction with a monoflop. That's all we need. Okay, it's perfectly simple. But anyway, that's set that up. Now, all things being fair, if I connect these, we should get a result if everything is okay. I mean, I may have a typo or two in there. We'll just see what happens. So let's play the sequence. Right, so we've got something here. It says range map. Okay, I spelled something wrong. So let's have a look, see where we are. I see what I've done. Let's just change that range mapper and not rand a mapper or whatever it says. So there, range mapper. Let's just give that another go. Go back to the beginning and see if that happens. See if we get a better result. Ah, now we can see that we're getting a result, can't we? We can see that the spline is changing shape. So things are working. That's really great. Now let's just zoom in. I tell you what we'll do, we'll just go back to a standard layout for a minute here. Just go back to our standard layout and let's zoom in and see what we've got there. Now there we go. We can see that that spline is changing shape. It's completely different to how it would have been. Let's just try something though. I just want to see if we're getting any results along that Z-axis. Let's just go into our top view, so F2. Zoom in a little bit. Are we getting any changes along the Z-axis? Don't appear to be there. Let's have a look. Right, so there might be something going on a little bit askew with the Z-axis. Let's just go back to our 3D view, hit H so that we can see everything again. And let's go back to the script layout and see what we've got in there. Python. Let's just get back to the parameters, or rather the node, and open in Python. Let's have a look, see what we've got. Just have a check, just to make sure that everything is working the way it should be. So they're all definitely connected. POSZ is there. Let's have a look. So we know that we set those up at 0 at frame 0. That's fine. Let's have a look. So here we are. POSZ is range mapper. Let's have a look. Z lower index. Random uniform. Random there. Yep. All looks as if that's set up okay. Yeah, it all looks as if it's set okay. Quite know what's going on there. Let's have another quick go and see if it actually makes any difference. Just go through there, because it will be different every time we do it. So let's just switch to our top view again. See what's going on. See if anything is going on in position Z. Something a bit odd is going on there by the looks of it. Yeah, there is something strange going on. I'll have a look. I'll just come back to you in a second. I'll just double check everything and I'll see what's going on. Okay, I know what the problem is. I've messed up. It's my bad. What I should have said, this shouldn't be POS Z. It should be POS X. If I make this POS X and I change this, let's just take that out of there, and I say, where are we? Global transform, POS X, and we drop that into there. That should give us a better result. Let's see what happens. Let's run the sequence, and we can see now we are getting it. Yeah, it should have been along that axis, not the other one. So in our code here, where we've got positions Z and stuff, anything that refers to position Z and Y, it should actually be X. So change them all to X's. So X, upper X, lower. And I've already changed the position Z variable here to position X. I did that in the edit. Now we need to change this range mapper here from range mapper Z to X, X lower and X upper. So that's got that one sorted out, and that should all be working fine now. Just get rid of this print because I don't need it anymore. I was just using that for test purposes. Just execute that. Let's see what hasn't been defined. Let's go back and just play the sequence and see if we've got that right. No, we still haven't. So where are we? X lower. I've still got some more to do, I think. Yeah, I've got to do X lower or an X upper in there. Let's just make sure we're somewhere near it. Are we anywhere nearer? No. where are we? 57. Range mapper X lower, X upper. Well, X lower and upper have been dealt with, and we've probably got to define them over here. So where are we? X lower, X upper. Let's have a look, see what we've got. Have we got anything? Not sure that we have. I think we've still got a few things we've got to sort out. Okay. Oh, what a nuisance. I don't know. These things happen from time to time, but there you go. It should be okay if we just say that as a range mapper X. Let's see what we've got. And now we've got it. There we go. And we can see that we're getting a nice result now. So it's just my bad there. When I did this originally, I probably did it along the x-axis rather than along the z-axis, and I think that's why I've done it that way. But that's okay, as long as you, as I say, do the things I've done here. Make sure if you've got any z's in there, you change them to x's all the way through the code. Everything will work and it will be fine. Right, let's just go back into our standard layout. Just have a quick look. So yeah, we're getting a nice shape to our spline. Now, our arc spline we need to use within a sweep. So if we bring in a circle, just drop this down here, and we'll change this to 2 centimeters, so a very small circle. Select them both, hold down Command and Option, and drop this into a sweep. And now we've got our arc, and we can see that that's working nicely. Now, the only thing is, we do still have a lag problem, because if we go back to 0, we can see it's still waiting there. So there's still a lag problem we need to deal with. Now let's have a look. Now the order of our actual expressions, this does want to be first, so the one with the Python code in does want to be first. Now this one here, this wants to be last in the sequence, so this needs to be dragged over here. And also we need to change the priority. We need to give this generators, and we need to make it -1. Right, there's just one final thing that we need to do. With our 2 carriers here, we need to select both of these, and in our basic tab here, we need to set this to -1 in the priority. The expression is fine, just set this to -1. And that should just about make things work. Let's just test it out, see what happens. So if we run the sequence and we stop, go back to there, we can see that it jumps back to its 0 position. So that's what we needed to do, and it's all working as we want it to. Okay, the only thing we need to do now is put the finishing touch to this expression, and then we'll be where we want to be. What we need to do is bring in some more nodes. So we need to bring in a time node. I'll do what I usually do and get rid of the time port and add a frame port. And we bring in a compare. So a logic compare, connect these two. It will need to be equal to, and the parameter will need to be 0, because we want to know when we're at frame 0. We also need a not, so we'll bring one of those in, place this here, plumb the output into it. So when this is 0, the output here will be 1, and vice versa. And then we need to bring in our arc spline here. And we need to, in our basic properties, bring an enabled port in, and then we can plumb this into here. Okay, so that's set that up. So at 0, our arc spline is going to disappear and we won't see the arc. Now let's just see where we are with some of the other things that we've got here. For a start, we don't really want to see the carrier spline, so we'll make that disappear. We don't really want to see our bases either, so we'll make those disappear. Let's see what we get. Okay, so we've got our arc rising up our poles now, and that's working quite nicely. So if we stop and go back to 0, we can see that the arc has now disappeared and we no longer see it. So that's what you need to do. That just needs to be generators -1, and these need to be zeroed out. So set it up like that, and that will solve any lag problems. And there we go. That's looking quite nice. It looks like an arc. I mean, if you give that a nice texture, a nice glowing texture, and make it look like an electrical arc, it should sell the thing quite nicely. Now, the only thing that we can do just to finish this off is bring in a cylinder, give it 100 in the radius, and we'll also go 100 high. And this will just make the base for the thing to stand on. And if we just move it down a little bit to somewhere in here, and I'll change to my front view, so F4, and we'll see where we are. In fact, what I will do is change to my right view, F3H, so that we can see everything. That's good. And let's see where we are. We drop this down. What we can do is give this a single height segment because it doesn't need any more, so just one, and we'll give it 30 rotation segments so that it matches up with everything else. Make it editable, and let's, in fact, before I do that, go into my caps, give us 2 caps, and then we can make it editable. Now what I'm going to do is, with my edge mode selected, UL, and select this edge loop, and then scale in until it's close to the center. Switch back to my right hand view, so F3, and then raise this up. In fact, what I'll do, if I go back to my 3D view, I'll go to points mode, and we can just select the center point as well. Just select that too, and then go back into my right hand view, and we can bring, let's have a look, see where we are. I need to select UL again so that I've got that row of points there, and let's just bring these up, and they want to so be somewhere there so that they just match up with the bottom of those two. And then what we can do is just move the cylinder down, say to about here somewhere, and then we'll bring in a couple of tubes, just 2 of those, drop them into the cylinder, or rather no, I won't actually, I'll drop one into my sphere here, and then with my coordinates what I can do is 0 this out, 0 out the Z, and that's fine, that's about where it needs to be. And then we can make some adjustments just to make this smaller. So the inner radius wants to be about 6, in fact a little bit more than that, we'll make it 7, and the outer radius can be say 12, and we can change the height, make that about 30, and that should be fine for that. I think that will work okay, and it's pretty much in the right sort of place, so we'll leave that like that. We can put a fillet on it. We'll make it, say, I don't know, 1, shall we? Make it just 1 centimetre. And then the same deal will apply to the other one. Just bring this one into our sphere here, 0 out along the Z, and take away the rotation. 7 for the inner radius, and then 12 for the outer radius, 30 for the height, and that's all good. Just put a bit of fillet on it, 1, and that just about finishes it off, and that's looking really nice. And there you have it. So let's just keep that running, and there you go. You can see how it works, and it's all working really nicely and looking great. So this is making the whole thing hang together really well. So yeah, that's how you go about doing it. And it's surprising how long-winded it is for just one simple object, but sometimes rigging is like that, and you do have to do more work with certain things than you actually think you're going to have to do, you know, but the end justifies the means, you know, and if you get a good looking result, and that is a pretty good looking result, it's going to sell that pretty well. And it does actually look good if you do put the glowing texture on it. I mean, I've done this with my original model, I played around with it, but I'm not going to do it here because, well, frankly, the tutorial is already long enough. We'll just sort of show you the mechanics of the thing and how that works and leave it at that. But yeah, I mean, there's a fair bit to it. Let's just go back to our script layout, I think, for this. There's a fair bit to it, but yeah, I mean, it's one of those things. You can't always do things in sort of 5 minutes. It does take a bit longer sometimes. But yeah, that's your code. So I mean, it's not heavy on code. There's not tons and tons of it. There's a few things to do, and I mean, you don't necessarily have to do all the splines. I mean, you could just do one spline if you wish to, but I put the extra ones in there because it just makes it more random, and that's what I was aiming for here: as much randomness within this object as possible in the way that it actually moved, just to make it that bit more credible, really. But anyway, that just about brings us to the end of this tutorial. And as always, I really hope you've enjoyed doing this one and that you've got some techniques here that you can use within your own projects. And if you have enjoyed the video, then please give it a like. And if you haven't already, please subscribe to the channel, leave a comment, and of course, ring the bell. And wherever you happen to be on social media, please do share this video, because all this good stuff really does help keep the channel moving in the right direction. But anyway, that just about brings the curtain down on this one. So I'll see you very soon on the next tutorial.